They tell us that most of the world's fairs that happened in the 1800s around the world were built from plaster and wood, basically temporary buildings. And this was supposed to be, to aid in the speed that these cities, which is what they really were, could be built. And so we had this narrative of these massive world's fairs that cover sometimes up to hundreds of acres and hundreds of buildings are being built in a year or two. And this is back in the 1800s, before there were power tools. There might have been a few steam machines around that would have helped them. But when you look at the size of these constructions, as far as the space they take up, and also the size of the buildings, how were they building these massively oversized buildings just out of a wooden frame, some wooden walls, and a bit of stucco on the outside? Now, they do say that they were using metal to give these buildings a bit of strength, but still, is this even possible that even if it was plaster and wood and iron, that they could actually build these world's fairs, these cities, in a year or two? Pretty unlikely, especially when today, we can't build even one large building in a year with all of our technology and tools. And the other main problem that we have with this theory is that we still have many, many World's Fairs buildings standing. They are everywhere. So we're just going to have a quick look at some of these buildings that are still standing from these supposedly temporary fairs, these buildings that were built temporarily to stand for 6 or 12 months and then be knocked over. Now, the question is, how are they still standing? And also, when you go up and have a look at these buildings, they are clearly not wood and stucco. They are solid stone and masonry buildings. So this is the Arc de Triomphe in Barcelona from the 1888 Universal Exposition. And as you can see, we've got everything here, right? Trams, big old world buildings. And this is still standing. There it is. So these aren't the biggest pictures. And here's another one back in the day, right? Built for the World's Fair, but still standing almost 150 years later. And this one clearly, again, it's not the best resolution, but clearly made from brick and stone, right? This is called the Castle of Three Dragons. And this is also from Barcelona, 1888. When you ask about these buildings that are still standing, the explanation they give is, oh, well, when they made the fairs, they made one or two of the buildings so that, they made them real, right? So that they were permanent, which makes no sense at all. That's just the only explanation they can come up with, because their story is wrong. But this is the Castle of Three Dragons, and here it is today. Still standing, definitely a castle. Memorial Hall, Philadelphia, USA, from 1876. Obviously a drawing here. You can see the size of this building though. Like, do you really think this could be made out of wood and stucco and a bit of iron? I mean, clearly this dome is glass and it's got to be done pretty well. It's got a big statue sitting on the top of it and it's pretty big, right? But again, we're told these are all permanent buildings. So this is not, some of these are not the best photos just because they're old and they're very sort of small. A lot of them, I tend to think that they reduce them so we can't get a good look at them. But this is the building today, Memorial Hall, Philadelphia, built 1876. And as you can see, right, big dome on top here, made out of glass, looks like copper. You can see where the paint's wearing off. And what, again, the story is these buildings were made out of wood and plaster, stucco, right? Clearly, this is all stonework. We've got the lights here. We've got these massive brass, probably, statues. Who was making those? None of this makes any sense at all, that these fairs were built to be temporary. This is the Royal Exhibition building in Melbourne. And this is an interesting building. I want to, do probably just a whole video on this, but it's also very similar to a lot of other World's Fair buildings we see with this massive, archway at the front, almost like a doorway of some kind, maybe. I don't know, cymatic shapes here, domes, it's got a lot of features of a cathedral or something, which many of these World's Fair buildings do, right? Here's a picture of it back in the day and sitting on a man-made, I think this may have been a lake rather than a canal, but still man-made water. And this massive, massive building. You can see this is a person here, pretty small, right, compared to this building. And here we are at night, all lit up. And this was in Melbourne, Australia, 1880. Okay, so literally a couple of years after the incandescent light bulb was invented, apparently. And so here you go, just something on the light bulbs. Thomas Edison invented the incandescent light bulb in 1879. However, many scientists and inventors had been working on the technology for decades, but Thomas Edison was the first one to make a light bulb that was easy to produce and that worked. We've got all these other ones, 1835, demonstrated an electric light, but these guys could never produce them in quantity, and that's what Edison got sorted. Edison created an incandescent bulb that burned long enough to be practical. There you go, 1879. Okay, and this shot here of Melbourne at night, all lit up, is 1880. How is this possible? And then they have enough light bulbs, enough cabling, and enough power and electricians to set it all up, right, and run it in 1880. There it is today. And fountains is another bit, right? Fountains are something else we'll get onto. And of course, this is the big one, right? We've all seen this one. This is Chicago, 1893 World's Fair. And they say that everything you see here was built in under 2 years, and there's over 200 buildings constructed. And again, the narrative for this is that these were built from stucco and wood. That's what they tell us. As you can see here, the buildings at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition held in Chicago were made from a mixture of plaster, cement, and jute fiber called staff. So they're not even saying wood in here or metal. And with that, they built all of this, okay, including the canals. They had to be dug, they had to be edged, they had to be filled with water. We've got boats here, that's a big canal. And I mean, look at this building, look at the size of this dome, right? Wood and stucco is what they want you to believe. This building here as well, another dome, another dome. These big spires, right, with angels up on the top. The whole lot built from stucco. But they don't mention the water much, do they, when they talk about these fairs and how they were built. So they don't talk about the canals, who made them, how they were dug. This is before power tools. At this time, they may have had some like early steam shovels, but they would have been literally the first ones. So probably not a big capacity. And basically, the tools they had were hand tools, right? And this is just a part of the canal system. And then there's the fountains, which need to be plumbed in, right, at pressure to pump water around and blow it out all the fountains. That is a massive system. And again, I don't want to talk about that. Here is the same shot at night time. All lit up. And again, this is like 15 years or so after the light bulb was invented, apparently. And here's another look. This is the same one, same fair. And you can just see, again, look at the amount of water here. Look at this fountain. This is just one fountain. Okay, imagine the plumbing needed just to run that one fountain, let alone all the other ones. Look at this obelisk sitting in the middle of a lake almost, or a man-made canal. Domes everywhere. Look at these massively oversized buildings. This is a person. Okay, look at the size of this building. Look at this. I mean, look at this building. It's just ridiculous. And look how much is under the roof in this building. And this might be the one, like at the fair, at the Chicago Fair, one of the buildings literally covered acres. It was acres big, acres under the roof. Like, and that's probably it. Look at the size of that thing, right? When you compare it to the people down here. So all of this, guys, they want us to believe it's built by stucco, but the problem is, like I said, a lot of these buildings are still standing. And as I said, one of the other big problems that they don't talk about with these fairs being built in 2 years and being temporary, and if that's even possible, to build this in 2 years, like with all these massive, massive buildings. Look at this one. So this is Chicago, 1893. And I just want to point out the amount of water, like the amount of canals that have been dug, right? This one, man-made islands in the middle. Here's some more man-made islands in this big lake, right? Another lake here. And that's without counting the fountains. There were fountains all over these places, right? So we've got all these canals. This all had to be dug. None of this was here in the narrative, right? None of it was there. It all had to be created. All the buildings, but all of the land work, right? And the landscaping. So when they made this island, they had to put all the trees, everything in it, dig the canals, and then put in all the plumbing for the fountain system, right? A proper pressurized plumbing system. And that's not easy, right? So how was this all done in 2 years? Do you believe that story or not? Let me know in the comments. And, what do you think about these buildings that are still standing? If you do believe that these were temporary buildings, what would be the explanation that some of them are still standing and clearly are brick buildings? This here is the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And this is from Chicago, where this exists. And basically down here, it tells you that electrical workers, it was founded 1891, 2 years before George Westinghouse won the electrical current wars by lighting the Chicago World's Fair, right? Columbian Exposition in 1893. So the Electrical Workers Union was founded 2 years before that. And this is, of course, just, what are we looking, 12 years after the light bulb was invented. And if you read this, it basically says they just had all these problems, a lot of labor fights, it was a lot about working conditions and pay and everything. But basically, they ended up having a war with the police. Okay, and this went from the 1880s up until like 1900. So I tried to find out how many actual workers that they had, how many electricians, and I couldn't find anything. So I did ask ChatGTP, how many electricians in Chicago in 1890? And it said it couldn't find the exact number. However, given the rapid expansion of electrical infrastructure and the increasing demand for electrical services during the period, it's reasonable to estimate that there were several hundred electricians working in the city at that time. So in all of Chicago, a couple of hundred electricians. So that's all they had to do the entire Chicago Fair in 2 years. Basically run all the electricity, all the lights, everything, and also service the rest of the city at the same time. And as you can see, Chicago's long labor history, 20 years from 1860 to 1880, Chicago's population grew from slightly over 100,000 to more than 500,000. Okay, so there was a lot going on. Then 10 years after that, 1893, they decided to have the World's Fair and, run all the electricity everywhere. And interesting, they say the growth happened after the Great Fire. I'm not sure why a Great Fire would promote a population growth. But basically down here, it says, by the 1890s, Chicago Building Trades Council included 30,000 workers, 31 separate trade unions, And this basically just caused a lot of, wars over monopolies and things. Between 1880 and 1905, so right through the period when this World's Fair was built, there were an estimated 37,000 strikes in the US, and the worst violence was often in Chicago. So, as far as the workers at that time, it was not smooth sailing. They didn't have a lot of them, and most of the time they were striking and fighting each other, trying to get better conditions. And I'll leave the link for this article as well as the other one, so you can have a read through. But definitely not conducive to building, one of the largest fairs ever, over 200 buildings on hundreds of acres, and build the whole thing in less than 24 months. It was about 20 months or so that they're supposed to have built the whole thing from scratch, including designing it, right? All the canals, all the buildings, all the plumbing. And we haven't even started to ask the question, where did all these workers live when they were building the World's Exposition? Where were they living? Where were they going to the toilet? Where was all the sewage systems? Where was all their food? I mean, just to look after the workers would have been a massive, massive task, right? They would have literally needed their own little city just for the workers to build this. But we don't get any information on anything like that. So there you go. Just wanted to sort of point that out. Mainly it was because I saw a video by Static in the Attic, and how you going, mate? If you're watching, and it's nothing against him, but he was saying that he believes that most of these buildings were built as temporary structures, but it just doesn't make sense to me. But I do like Static. I like his channel. He does some good stuff. It's definitely nothing against him. I'm not saying he's wrong. It's just a different opinion, right? And different opinions are awesome because they make us think. They make us think different thoughts, so we can come up with new interpretations and new perspectives. So love to hear your opinion on this, guys. What do you think? Were these just temporary fairs that were built in 2 years from scratch, right? Literally from, start designing now, and in 2 years, let the people through the gates. That's the story. And some of them were 1 year. What do you think? If they were stucco and made to be temporary, why do we still have so many of these buildings still standing, and large buildings that are definitely made of, stone and brick? And what do you think about the canals and the fountains? Who made those? There's little to no information on that. Really, the only information I could get was asking ChatGTP or some other AI to estimate numbers, because there's nothing, right? There's just no information on how many workers did this, how many electricians, how many builders, how many plumbers, where did they live, what did they eat, where did they go to the toilet, where did the sewage go, where was the food coming in, where was it stored, where was the power plants for these places? We don't get really any information on any of this. But you can look at these cities just, these fairs just as the buildings, right? But there is so much more that had to go on to get these completed into running fairs, right? Than just building the buildings. So thanks for spending some time with me. Hope you enjoyed that one. Please do leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Give me a like, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the bell, all that kind of good stuff that, what we're supposed to say, helps the algorithm. Please share this around, all that kind of stuff. And I hope you enjoyed that. Stay awesome, and I'll see you all on the next upload. Bye for now.
Remember, in the end, nobody wins unless everybody wins. Come on!